In the unforgiving winter of 1888, in the heart of the Montana Territories, a woman named Jade Monroe was found shackled to an iron post. Left to freeze in the snow, her only crime was running from her own wedding from a groom whose name echoed with power and terror. She was moments from death when a rider appeared a silhouette against the blinding white. He was a lone cowboy, a man marked by his own brutal past, with only one arm to his name. This isn't just a story of rescue. It's the story of what happens after the chains are cut. It's a tale of secrets that kill, of a fortune built on lies, and how two broken people must confront a monster who owns the law, the land, and everyone on it. The cold was a physical thing. It did not simply surround Jade Monroe. It invaded her. It was a predator sinking its teeth into her bones, leeching the last of her warmth with a slow, deliberate cruelty. Her world had shrunk to the bite of the iron shackle around her left ankle, the rough-hewn surface of the weathered post she was chained to, and the endless, blinding expanse of snow that stretched in every direction under a mercilessly grey sky. Her wedding dress, a ludicrous garment of lace and silk, meant for a Boston chapel, was now a tattered, frozen shroud. The delicate fabric was ripped and stained, clinging to her skin like a second, colder flesh. Each gust of wind was a fresh torment, driving needles of ice through the tears, reminding her of her folly. Had it only been 2 days since she ran? 2 days since she had sprinted from the church in Blackwater Gulch, leaving her groom, the formidable Mr. Silas Blackwood, standing at the altar. Silas. His name was a curse on her lips, a puff of frozen air that vanished into the gale. He wasn't a man to be scorned. He was the architect of Blackwater Gulch, the owner of the silver mine, the bank, and the loyalty of every man who drew a wage from him. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a civilizing force in the wild Montana Territory. To Jade, he was the reason her father, a geologist named Thomas Monroe, was dead. She hadn't understood until she found the ledger. The night before her wedding, packing her late father's trunk, her fingers had brushed against a false bottom. Inside lay a thin, leather-bound book. Her father's precise academic script filled its pages not with geological surveys, but with a meticulous accounting of Silas Blackwood's crimes. It detailed how Silas had systematically and illegally expanded his mining claims using fraudulent assays and violent intimidation to seize land from smaller prospectors. Her father's final entry was a damning accusation Silas had engineered a cave-in to eliminate 2 partners who had discovered his scheme. Her father had been the next loose end. His accidental fall from a cliff a month prior was no accident at all. The ledger was tucked into a hidden pocket she had sewn inside her corset. It was the reason she ran, and the reason Silas could not let her go. It wasn't about a broken heart. It was about self-preservation. A man like Silas Blackwood did not leave witnesses. Her capture had been terrifyingly efficient. Silas hadn't even come himself. He had sent his foremen, Jed and Luke, men whose loyalty was bought and paid for in silver coin. They'd caught up to her stolen horse 20 miles out of town. There had been no pleading, no negotiation. They had dragged her here to this forgotten survey marker in the middle of nowhere and chained her to the post. Mr. Blackwood wants you to have some time to reflect on your vows. Jed had sneered, his breath fogging in the cold. He figures a day or 2 out here will make you appreciate the warmth of his home. He'll be along to collect his bride. But Jade knew Silas. He wouldn't come to collect her. He would come to confirm her death to retrieve the ledger he suspected she had, and to bury her where no one would ever find her. This was not a lesson. It was an execution. Her eyelids were heavy, crusted with ice. The shivering had mostly stopped, a terrifying sign of the body surrendering. A strange, peaceful lethargy was creeping in, whispering that sleep would be a blessed release. It was a siren song, and she was dangerously close to listening. That's when she heard it. It wasn't the howl of the wind or the cry of a distant wolf. It was something rhythmic, heavy. The thump, thump, thump of a horse trudging through deep snow. Hope was a feeling so alien, it was painful. She tried to lift her head, her neck muscles screaming in protest. Through the swirling snow, a figure emerged. A man on a sturdy-looking roan. Appaloosa, a dark shape against the overwhelming white. He wore a heavy bison-hide coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm. He stopped his horse about 20 yards away, his posture very like a man accustomed to trouble. He sat there for a long moment, simply watching. She could feel his gaze on her, assessing the impossible scene. A woman in a ruined wedding dress chained in a blizzard. For a terrifying minute, she thought he might be one of Silas's men sent to finish the job. Or worse, just a passer-by who would deem her beyond saving and ride on, unwilling to involve himself. "Help! Me?" She croaked, the sound a dry, pathetic rasp. The man dismounted, his movements deliberate. He sank to his thighs in the snow, but pressed on his eyes, never leaving her. As he drew closer, she saw the details that the storm had obscured. His face was weathered, carved with lines of hardship that made him look older than his years, which she guessed to be around 30. A dark, untrimmed moustache covered his upper lip, and his eyes were a startlingly pale blue, the color of a winter sky after a storm. And then she saw it. His left sleeve was pinned up at the shoulder, empty. The man had only one arm. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze dropping to the heavy iron cuff and the chain that snaked from her ankle to the post. His expression was unreadable, a mask of hardened stoicism. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like gravel scraped over stone. Jade hesitated. To speak Silas Blackwood's name was to invite death. Anyone in 100-mile radius knew who he was and what he was capable of. This stranger might be a friend, or he might be another man on Silas's payroll. "Please," she whispered, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Just, please." The one-armed cowboy didn't press her. He looked from her face, blue with cold, back to the shackle. He let out a slow breath, the vapor pluming in front of his face. He seemed to come to a decision. "All right, miss," he said, his tone softening a fraction. "Let's see about getting you out of this." He turned and trudged back to his horse. Jade's heart sank. Was he leaving? But he returned a moment later, carrying a heavy tool roll and a small wood-handled hacksaw from his saddlebags. He knelt in the snow beside her, ignoring the biting wind and the frozen ground. "This is going to take a minute," he said, positioning the saw blade against the chain. "And it's going to make a racket. You just hold on." The screech of metal on metal was a hideous grating sound that tore through the muffled silence of the snowscape. The man worked with a practiced, steady rhythm, his one powerful arm driving the saw back and forth. It was an awkward, exhausting motion, but he never faltered. Each stroke was a promise. Each grating shriek was a note in a song of liberation. Jade watched him, a sense of unreality washing over her. His name, his story, why he was out here in the heart of a blizzard. None of it mattered. All that mattered was the singular focus in his pale blue eyes and the relentless motion of his arm. He was an impossible savior in an impossible situation. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The man's breathing grew heavy with exertion, but the rhythm of the saw never broke. Finally, with a sharp snap, the chain link broke. The tension on her ankle vanished. The shackle was still there, a cold iron bracelet, but it was no longer tethered to her prison. She was free. The man dropped the saw and looked at her. "Can you stand?" Jade tried, but her legs were numb, useless things. She crumpled back into the snow with a cry of frustration. Without a word, the cowboy knelt, wrapped his one strong arm around her waist, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her through the deep snow back to his horse, his steps sure and steady. He draped her over the saddle, then expertly mounted behind her, his body acting as a shield against the wind. He wrapped a thick wool blanket from his bedroll around her shaking form. His proximity was jarring the heat from his body, a shocking contrast to the deadly cold she had endured. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Jade," she managed to say. "Jade Monroe." "Caleb," he replied. "Folks call me Caleb Hayes. Hold tight, Jade Monroe. I'll get you somewhere warm." As the Appaloosa turned and began its slow, powerful journey away from the post, Jade looked back one last time. The broken chain lay half buried in the snow, a testament to her aborted execution. She was alive. She was free. But as the silhouette of Caleb Hayes carried her into the teeth of the blizzard, she knew this was not an ending. It was a terrifying new beginning. She had escaped Silas Blackwood's grasp for now, but she had also just implicated this one-armed stranger in her rebellion, and Silas was not a man who forgot. The world outside the heavy wool blanket was a howling chaos of white. Jade surrendered to the motion of the horse, her head resting against Caleb's broad chest. The steady beat of his heart was a grounding rhythm in the storm. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind a feverish soup of fear and relief. Each time she surfaced, the reality of her situation crashed down anew. She had traded a static, freezing death for a journey into the unknown with a man who was a complete mystery. After what felt like hours, the horse's pace slowed. The wind's howl lessened, muffled by the sudden presence of dense pine trees. Through a slit in the blanket, Jade saw the dark shape of a small, secluded cabin nestled in a clearing and almost completely swallowed by the snow. A thin curl of smoke rose from its stone chimney, a beacon of impossible warmth. Caleb dismounted, and with the same surprising strength as before, lifted her down. He kicked the cabin door open and carried her inside. The immediate wave of heat was so intense it was painful. A large stone fireplace dominated the single room, a healthy fire crackling within its hearth. The cabin was Spartan but clean. A rough-spun cot stood against one wall, a simple wooden table and 2 chairs in the center, and shelves holding tins of food books and various tools. It was the space of a man who lived a solitary, self-sufficient life. Caleb gently set her down on a bearskin rug in front of the fire. "We need to get those wet clothes off you," he said, his tone practical, not predatory. "And look at that foot." He turned away, giving her a semblance of privacy as he stoked the fire. With fumbling, numb fingers, Jade worked at the buttons of her ruined dress. The fabric, stiff with ice, cracked and tore as she peeled it away. Underneath, her corset and chemise were soaked through. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. Caleb handed her another thick, dry blanket without looking at her. She wrapped it tightly around herself, huddling closer to the flames. He knelt before her, his focus entirely on her left foot. The iron shackle was still locked around her ankle. The skin beneath it and across her foot was a terrifying patchwork of waxy white and angry red. Frostbite. "This is Ben," he murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. He retrieved a small metal box and opened it. It contained salves, bandages, and a small flask. He uncorked the flask and handed it to her. "Whiskey. Drink it. It'll hurt like hell when the feeling comes back." She took a long, shuddering gulp. The liquor burned a trail down her throat, but it sent a welcome fire into her belly. Caleb's task now was more delicate than sawing through the chain. He took a set of small, intricate tools from the box tools she recognized as belonging to a locksmith. With a surgeon's focus, he began to work on the shackle's lock. His one hand was remarkably dexterous, his fingers probing the mechanism with a delicate touch that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "You're a man of many talents, Mr. Hayes," Jade said, her voice still shaky. "Cowboy locksmith." He didn't look up from his work. "A man alone learns what he has to. This kind of lock, it's a slaymaker, top of the line. Whoever put this on you didn't mean for it to come off." A small click echoed in the quiet room, and the shackle sprang open. He carefully removed it, revealing the raw, chafed skin beneath. He worked in silence for a while, gently cleaning her foot and applying a pungent, greasy salve. His touch was firm, but gentle. He wrapped her foot and ankle in clean bandages, his movements efficient and sure. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, gesturing to the discarded lock. He finally met her eyes. "Spent some time as a Pinkerton agent, back before..." He glanced involuntarily at his empty sleeve. "You learn things. A Pinkerton." That explained his wariness, his skill set. It also opened 1,000 new questions. He finished his work and sat back on his heels. "Now," he said, his pale blue eyes pinning her, "you need to tell me who you are running from, Jade Monroe, because whoever it is, when they find you gone, they're going to come looking. And now they're going to be looking for a one-armed man on a roan Appaloosa too. You brought a war to my door. I deserve to know its name." The directness of his question left no room for evasion. She owed him that much. She took another sip of whiskey, the liquid courage bolstering her resolve. "The man I was supposed to marry," she began, her voice low. "His name is Silas Blackwood." Caleb's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something recognition dread passed through his eyes. He knew the name. Everyone did. "Blackwood." He repeated the name, tasting like ash. "You ran from Silas Blackwood's wedding altar." He let out a low whistle. "Ma'am, you don't just run from a man like that. You run from a king. What did you do?" "It's not what I did," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's what I know." She told him everything. About her father, his work as a geologist for Silas, his convenient accident. She told him about the false bottom in the trunk and the damning contents of the ledger. She explained that Silas's entire empire, the foundation of Blackwater Gulch, was built on fraud, theft, and murder. As she spoke, she watched Caleb's face. The stoic mask remained, but his eyes darkened. He understood the stakes. This wasn't a domestic dispute. It was a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the territory's power structure. "And you have this ledger?" he asked when she finished. She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around her chest, where the ledger was still safely tucked in her corset, now lying in a heap of wet clothes. "It's the only proof." Caleb stood up and paced the small cabin, his single hand stroking his moustache in thought. The floorboards creaked under his heavy boots. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside, a reminder of the temporary nature of their sanctuary. "This is a whole world of trouble," he said, finally stopping to look at her. "Silas Blackwood owns the sheriff in Blackwater Gulch. He probably owns the territorial judge in Helena, too. A ledger ain't enough. All he has to do is claim you're a hysterical woman, scorned and spouting lies. He'll have a dozen men to swear to it." "Then what do I do?" Jade asked, despair creeping back into her voice. "He'll never stop looking for me, or for that ledger." "No, he won't," Caleb agreed. He walked over to a shelf and pulled down a well-worn book. He opened it, and Jade saw that the pages had been hollowed out. Inside, nestled against the paper, was a Colt Peacemaker revolver. He checked the cylinder, then holstered it. The sight of the gun was a stark reminder of the world they were in, a world where ledgers were less persuasive than lead. "For now," Caleb said, his voice grim. "We survived the storm. You rest, get your strength back. When the snow lets up, we have a decision to make." He didn't say what the decision was, but Jade knew. They could run, trying to stay one step ahead of a man with limitless resources, or they could turn somehow and fight. She looked at this quiet, haunted man who had saved her. He had his own ghosts, his own story etched into the lines on his face and the absence of his arm. He hadn't asked for this fight, but by cutting that chain, he had entered the fray. Over the next day, a fragile, unspoken trust began to form between them. He cooked for her a simple but hearty stew of venison and dried vegetables. He never pried further into her story, and she in turn did not ask about his past as a Pinkerton or the event that cost him his arm. The questions hung in the air between them, shrouded in the smoke from the fire and the silence of the storm. He gave her his cot, insisting on taking the bearskin rug by the fire for himself. In the dead of night, Jade would wake from feverish dreams of Silas's cold eyes and Jed's sneering face. She would see Caleb's silhouette sitting watch, the faint orange glow of the embers glinting off the barrel of the revolver resting on his lap. He was a guardian, but a reluctant one. On the third morning, the wind died down. A pale, watery sunlight filtered through the cabin's single, grimy window. The world was reborn, buried under a pristine blanket of white. Caleb was already up, saddling his horse. "Storms broke," he announced. "Blackwood's men will be able to ride again. They'll go back to that post. When they see you're gone, they'll start tracking." "Tracking us?" Jade asked, her heart hammering. "They'll find my horse's prints leading away. They'll follow. We have maybe a day's lead, if we're lucky." He finished with the saddle and turned to her. His blue eyes were serious. "We can't stay here. I have a friend, an old prospector named Elias Thorne, runs a supply post up in the Sapphire Mountains. It's a hard ride, but it's isolated. We might be able to lay low there, figure out our next move." "A friend?" Jade asked, a sliver of hope in her voice. "Can he be trusted?" Caleb paused, his hand on the horse's mane. "I trusted him with my life once. I reckon I can trust him with yours." He helped her dress, providing her with a pair of men's trousers, a warm flannel shirt, and a heavy sheepskin coat that belonged to him. The clothes were far too big, but they were warm and practical. As she dressed, she secured the ledger once more. It was a cold, hard rectangle against her skin, a constant reminder of the price on her head. As they prepared to leave the small cabin, Jade looked around the Spartan room that had been her sanctuary. "Thank you, Caleb," she said softly. "You saved my life." "Life ain't saved till the threat is gone," he answered gruffly, avoiding her gaze. "We're a long way from that. Mount up." They rode out into the dazzling, silent world. The beauty of the snow-covered landscape was a stark contrast to the danger that nipped at their heels. Jade rode behind Caleb, her arms wrapped around his waist, feeling the tension in his body. They were two fugitives, bound by a shared enemy. As they pushed deeper into the untamed wilderness, she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just riding towards a sanctuary, but towards a confrontation that neither of them could escape. The embers of trust were there, but the world was full of winds that could snuff them out in an instant. The journey to the Sapphire Mountains was a grueling testament to the unforgiving nature of the land. They rode hard, speaking little, conserving their energy. Caleb pushed his horse, the Appaloosa, with a relentless urgency that bordered on cruel, but Jade understood. Their lives depended on the distance they could put between themselves and Blackwater Gulch. He navigated the treacherous, snow-choked terrain with an instinct that bordered on supernatural finding-game trails and hidden valleys that were invisible to her untrained eye. He was a man in his element, yet the tension never left him. His single hand rarely strayed from the revolver at his hip, and his gaze constantly scanned their back trail. Jade, riding behind him, learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the slight tensing of his shoulders that signaled a sound he didn't like, the way his head would tilt as he listened to the wind. After 2 days of hard riding, they crested a ridge. Below them, nestled in a narrow, pine-choked canyon, was a collection of rough buildings. Thorn's supply post. It wasn't a town, merely a trading post, a stable, and a few small cabins all huddled together as if for warmth. "We're here," Caleb said, a hint of relief in his voice. "Elias is a bit of a hermit. He doesn't get many visitors, especially in winter. It's as safe a place as any to hole up." As they rode down into the canyon, a grizzled old man, with a wild shock of white hair and a beard that reached his chest, emerged from the main building. He carried a shotgun held loosely, but ready. "Caleb! By God, is that you?" The old man shouted, his voice a gravelly boom. "What in tarnation are you doing out in this weather? And who's that with you?" "It's me, Elias," Caleb called out, dismounting. "This is Jade. We're in a bit of trouble." Elias Thorne's suspicious squint softened as he recognized Caleb. He lowered the shotgun. "Trouble, you say? That's about the only thing that travels in a blizzard. Get inside, both of you. You look half frozen." The supply post was a chaotic but warm haven smelling of leather, tobacco, wood smoke, and brewing coffee. Shelves overflowed with goods, everything from sacks of flour and beans to pickaxes, dynamite, and ammunition. Elias poured them both a mug of steaming black coffee that was strong enough to dissolve a horseshoe. "Now," Elias said, leaning his massive frame against the counter. "Tell old Elias what kind of hornet's nest you two kicked over." Caleb recounted a condensed version of their story, omitting the ledger for now, but making it clear that Jade was fleeing Silas Blackwood, and that Blackwood's men were hunting them. Elias let out a long, slow whistle, stroking his beard. "Blackwood," he spat as if the name were poison. "That man's ambition is a cancer on this territory. You're right to run from him, girl." He looked at Jade with newfound respect. "And you, Caleb, getting tangled up in this, that ain't like you." "I didn't have much choice in the matter," Caleb said curtly. "No," Elias chuckled. "I suppose not. Your conscience always did get the better of you." He turned to Jade. "You're safe here, miss. Blackwood's reach is long, but this canyon is my kingdom. His men won't find you here, not easily." The relief was so profound, Jade felt light-headed. Elias gave them a small, clean cabin to use, and for the first time in nearly a week, she slept without fear. The days that followed settled into a quiet routine. Caleb helped Elias with chores, chopping wood, tending to the few animals, his one-armed proficiency a constant source of wonder to Jade. She helped inside mending clothes and taking inventory of the supplies. The small sanctuary allowed the tension between them to ease. In the evenings, sitting by the fire in the main post, they would talk. Jade spoke of her life in Boston, of her father's passion for geology, the world of books and academia she had left behind. In return, Caleb began to slowly, hesitantly open up about his own past. He told her about his time with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. He had been one of their best known for his relentless tracking and his sharp mind. His specialty was hunting men like Silas Blackwood, wealthy, powerful criminals who hid their deeds behind a veneer of respectability. "The man I was after," he said one night, staring into the fire, his voice low, "was a railroad baron named Tiberius Kane. He was seizing land for a new line, using hired thugs to burn out homesteaders who wouldn't sell. The law was in his pocket. I was sent to gather evidence." He paused, and his hand unconsciously went to his empty sleeve. "I got close, found a witness, a paymaster willing to testify against him. We were holed up in a hotel waiting for the U.S. Marshals, but someone talked. Kane's men stormed the place. The paymaster was killed in the first volley." Caleb's voice grew tight with old anger and grief. "I was trying to hold them off. A stick of dynamite came through the window, took my arm, and my nerve with it. The agency said I was a hero, gave me a pension, but I failed. Kane walked free. The homesteaders got nothing. I quit after that. Came out here to be left alone." Jade finally understood the source of his haunted eyes, his reluctance to get involved. She was a living echo of his greatest failure. Her fight against Blackwood was the same impossible battle he had already lost once before. "You didn't fail, Caleb," she said softly. "You fought. That's more than most men would do." His gaze met hers across the flickering firelight, and in that moment, a profound understanding passed between them. They were more than just fugitives. They were kindred spirits, both scarred by the brutalities of powerful men. Their fragile peace was shattered a week later. A lone rider approached the canyon, a rough-looking man Jade had never seen before. He was a trapper, he claimed, looking to trade pelts for supplies. Elias and Caleb were immediately on edge. The trapper, a man named Finn, was loud and boisterous, but his eyes were cold and constantly moving, taking in every detail of the post. He looked at Jade a little too long, a flicker of recognition in his gaze that sent a chill down her spine. After he had traded his furs and left, Caleb's suspicion was palpable. "I don't like it," he said to Elias. "He asked too many questions. About the trails, about who else has been through." "Just a lonely man making conversation," Elias grumbled, though he looked worried too. 2 days later, their fears were realized. Caleb was chopping wood behind the main cabin when he suddenly froze, holding the axe aloft. He had heard something, the jingle of a harness, the crunch of snow where there should be no sound. He moved silently to the edge of the trees, peering down the canyon trail. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 riders moving cautiously. One was the trapper, Finn. The other 2 were Jed and Luke Silas Blackwood's foreman. Finn had not been a trapper. He was a scout. He had found them. Caleb sprinted back to the cabin where Jade was. "They're here," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "Blackwood's men. We have to go. Now." Panic seized Jade. There was no escape. They were boxed in the canyon. "There's an old mining tunnel at the back of the canyon," Caleb said, his mind working fast. "Elias knows it. It cuts through to the mountain. It's a long shot, but it's the only way." They ran to the main post. "Elias, they found us." The old prospector didn't waste a second. He grabbed his heavy shotgun and a box of shells. "Damn that Finn to hell," he swore. "He was sniffing around for a bounty, I'd wager." He looked at Caleb, his old eyes fierce. "You get the girl to the tunnel. I'll hold them off. Buy you some time." "No, Elias," Caleb protested. "We fight them together." "Don't be a fool, boy," Elias roared, shoving the shotgun into Caleb's hands. "You're faster than me, and the girl can't run. You have a chance on the other side of that mountain. I'm an old man who's lived his life. My fight is here. Now, go!" There was no time to argue. Jed, Luke, and Finn had reached the edge of the clearing and were dismounting, spreading out rifles ready. "The tunnel is due north past the creek bed," Elias yelled, pulling a large rifle from behind the counter. "Godspeed, Caleb!" Caleb grabbed Jade's hand, and they bolted out the back door of the supply post, plunging into the deep snow and the thicket of pines. Behind them, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the canyon, followed by the booming reply of Elias's gun. The battle for Thorn's supply post had begun. As they scrambled through the snow, the sounds of the gunfight grew more intense. Jade's heart was breaking for the brave old man who was sacrificing himself for them. She risked a glance back and saw Elias using the corner of the main building for cover, firing methodically at the advancing men. "Don't look back," Caleb commanded, pulling her along. "His stand is for nothing if we don't make it." They found the creek bed and followed it, stumbling over icy rocks and through waist-deep drifts. Finally they saw it, a dark opening in the rock face partially obscured by a frozen waterfall, the entrance to the old mine. Just as they reached it, the sound of gunfire from the supply post abruptly stopped. A horrifying silence fell over the canyon, broken only by their own ragged breaths. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. It meant the fight was over. It meant Elias Thorn was likely dead. A wave of guilt and sorrow washed over Jade. This was her fault. Elias was dead because of her, because of the ledger she carried. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. His face was a grim granite mask of grief and fury. "We honor him by surviving," he said, his voice raw. He pushed her toward the dark maw of the tunnel. "Get inside. We have to keep moving." As they stepped from the bright snow into the dripping absolute darkness of the earth, Jade knew that their sanctuary had become a tomb for a brave man. The world was shrinking, the darkness closing in, and out there in the blood-stained snow of the canyon, their enemies were picking up their trail once more. The darkness inside the mine was total and suffocating. It was a physical presence pressing in on them, stealing their breath. The air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of wet stone and decay. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of unseen water and the frantic pounding of Jade's own heart. Caleb fumbled in his coat and produced a small tin of matches and a candle stub. In the flickering, hesitant light, the tunnel stretched before them, a rough-hewn wound in the rock. Heavy wooden beams, slick with moisture and blooming with fungus, strained to hold back the weight of the mountain. "This is the widow's maw," Caleb said, his voice a low echo in the confined space. "Goes straight through the mountain to the old silver district on the other side. Elias told me it's been abandoned for 20 years. Said it was unstable." "Unstable," Jade repeated, her voice trembling. It's all we have, Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for debate. He held the candle aloft. Stay close. Watch your footing. They moved forward, their footsteps unnervingly loud in the profound silence. The small flame of the candle cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes, turning rock formations into crouching beasts and twisted support beams into skeletal figures. The guilt over Elias's sacrifice was a heavy stone in Jade's gut. The brave old man had died for them, for the slim chance that this treacherous path offered. They'll come in after us, she whispered. I know, Caleb replied, but they don't know this tunnel. We have to use that. As they delved deeper, the main tunnel branched. A smaller, darker passage veered off to the right. Caleb paused, holding the candle near the entrance. A rusted ore cart sat on a decrepit track leading into the blackness. This gives me an idea, he said. He handed her the candle. Hold this, and be ready to run. He put his shoulder to the heavy ore cart. With a great groan of protest from its rusted wheels, it began to move. Caleb, using his powerful legs and single arm, maneuvered the cart until it was positioned at the junction. He then began piling loose rocks and debris in front of it, creating a crude but effective barricade that partially blocked the main tunnel, forcing anyone who followed to slow down and squeeze past. It won't stop them, he said, breathing heavily from the exertion. But it'll break them up, make them come one at a time. They continued on the main tunnel, their only path. The air grew colder, and a faint, steady draft blew against their faces, signaling an opening somewhere ahead. It was a sign of hope, a promise of an exit. Suddenly a sound from behind them echoed up the tunnel. A shout. It was Jed's voice, distorted by the rock walls. They're in the mine, another voice. Finns called back. See a light up ahead. They ain't far. Caleb immediately blew out the candle, plunging them back into absolute blackness. Don't make a sound, he whispered, his hand finding hers in the dark. The warmth of his grip was her only anchor. They stood frozen, listening. They could hear their pursuers approaching, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel floor, their voices drawing closer. They reached Caleb's barricade. Damn it! It was Luke's voice, full of frustration. He's blocked the path. Shove that cart out of the way, Jed ordered. There was a series of grunts and the screech of metal as they tried to move the ore cart. Jade held her breath, her knuckles white where she gripped Caleb's hand. Then a new voice cut through the darkness, cold and authoritative, a voice that froze the blood in Jade's veins. Enough. You're making too much noise. Silas Blackwood. He was here, in the mine. He hadn't waited for his men to do the job. He had come himself. The stakes had just been raised to an unbearable level. Silas wasn't here just for the ledger anymore. After she had humiliated him, after her escape had led to a gunfight, this was now personal. He was here to erase his mistake and everyone associated with it. Mr. Blackwood, Jed stammered, we've got them trapped. You have nothing until she is in my hand, and the cowboy is dead. Silas corrected him, his voice dangerously calm. Finn, you claim to be a tracker. How far ahead? Not far, sir. Finn's voice replied, sounding less confident now. They doused their light. But this tunnel only goes one way. They're like rats in a trap. Jade could feel Caleb's mind working beside her in the dark. He gave her hand a squeeze, a signal. He leaned in his lips, brushing her ear. There's a vertical shaft about 50 yards ahead, he whispered, so quietly she could barely hear him. Leads to an upper ventilation gallery. If we can reach it, we can get above them." He began to lead her forward, their steps now infinitesimally slow and careful, trying to place their feet on solid rock to avoid the crunch of gravel. The darkness was their only shield. Behind them, Silas and his men were dealing with the barricade. The scraping and cursing provided a thin veil of sound to cover their retreat. They shuffled forward through the black Caleb's hand, guiding her his memory of Elias's long-ago descriptions of the mine, their only map. Finally, he stopped. He reached out his hand, sweeping the rock wall. "Here," he breathed. He struck a match. In the brief, flaring light, Jade saw it, a dark, square hole in the ceiling of the tunnel. A series of rusted iron rungs were embedded in the rock wall, leading up into the shaft. They looked ancient and treacherous. "I'll go first," Caleb said. "When I'm up, I'll help you." He put the match out. Handing her his revolver, he reached up and grasped the first rung. It groaned under his weight. He tested it, then began to climb, his movements slow and deliberate. Jade stood below in the pitch black, her heart in her throat, listening to the scuff of his boots on the rock and his strained breathing. It was an agonizingly slow ascent for a man with only one arm. Finally, she heard his voice from above. "All right, I'm here. Send up the gun." She held the heavy Colt peacemaker up, and he reached down his arm, a shadowy extension from the hole above, and took it. "Okay, Jade, your turn. Come on up. I've got you." Her hands were slick with nervous sweat. She grasped the first cold, rusted rung and began to climb. The rungs were slick with moisture and frighteningly insecure. Below, the darkness of the main tunnel seemed to yawn, waiting to swallow her. Above, Caleb's voice was a steady encouragement. "That's it. One at a time. Don't look down." She was halfway up when she heard the voices from below, again much closer this time. "Should be just ahead," Finn was saying. "They can't have vanished." A beam of light from a powerful lantern suddenly cut through the darkness, sweeping across the tunnel floor below her. Jade froze, plastered against the rock wall, her heart seizing in her chest. If they looked up, they would see her. "Hold that light steady," Silas commanded from behind the beam. The circle of light moved slowly, methodically along the tunnel walls. It was seconds away from illuminating her. She closed her eyes, bracing for the shout of discovery, for the gunshot that would follow. "Wait," said Finn's voice. "What's this?" The light stopped, pointing at the wall just past the shaft. "Tracks, leading into this side tunnel here. They tried to trick us." Jade opened her eyes in disbelief. They had found the tracks leading to the barricaded passage, the one Caleb had used the ore cart to block. In the darkness, they had mistaken it for their main path. "Cunning," Silas murmured, a grudging respect in his tone. "After them. And be quiet. I want her alive." The beam of light moved away, disappearing into the side tunnel. Their footsteps faded. They had been given a miracle. Jade scrambled up the remaining rungs, and Caleb's strong hand grabbed her arm, hauling her onto the solid floor of the upper gallery. She collapsed, shaking and gasping for air. They were in a much narrower tunnel, little more than a crawl space, but it was a reprieve. They were, for the moment, safe. Caleb lit the candle stub again. "That won't hold them for long," he said. "That tunnel's a dead end. Once they realize, they'll be back on the main path." He looked at her, his face grim in the candlelight. "This changes things. We can't just run. Even if we get out of this mine, he'll never stop. A man like Blackwood, a man who comes into the dark himself. He's obsessed. There's only one way this ends." Jade looked at the revolver in his hand, then back at his face. She knew what he was going to say. The chase was over. The flight was done. Here in the belly of the mountain, they had to make their stand. "The ledger," she said, her voice finding a new hard strength she didn't know she possessed. "It's all I have." "It's not about the ledger anymore, Jade," Caleb said quietly. "He can't afford to let either of us walk out of this mountain alive. We know who he is." He checked the cylinder of the revolver. "This is where we end it, on our terms." He looked down the ventilation gallery. The faint draft was stronger here. The way out was close, but they weren't running to it anymore. They were preparing for a battle in the dark against a tyrant who had brought the fight to them. The echoes in the mine were no longer just sounds. They were the ghosts of Caleb's past and the premonition of a final bloody confrontation. The ventilation gallery was their last desperate advantage. A narrow, stooped passage running parallel to the main tunnel, it was a ghost's perch above their hunters. Peering through cracks in the rock, Caleb's mind ignited with a plan born of brutal necessity. "They'll come back this way," he whispered to Jade, his voice a low echo in the oppressive dark. "We can't fight all three of them head-on. We have to split them up." He led her forward to a deep fissure that offered a clear view of a bottleneck in the tunnel 20 feet below. It was a natural kill box. He settled himself, resting the long barrel of his Colt Peacemaker on the stone ledge, a portrait of lethal patience. "I need a distraction," he said, his eyes never leaving the passage below. "Go back 30 feet. When they enter the narrowest point, make a noise. Throw a rock, yell anything to draw one of them away. Be convincing." Jade nodded, her fear hardening into resolve. She thought of Elias Thorne's sacrifice of her murdered father. This was no longer just about escape. She took a heavy loose rock and crept back down the gallery, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Moments later, the beam from Silas Blackwood's lantern sliced through the darkness below, followed by the three remaining men. They moved with caution into the bottleneck. "It's too quiet," Luke the foreman muttered nervously. "I don't like it." "They're trapped," Silas sneered. "Nowhere left to run." Now. Jade hurled the rock with all her might. It clattered down a hidden rock chute, landing with a loud cascade of pebbles in the tunnel far behind the men. "What was that?" Luke yelled, spinning around. "It came from behind us," Finn the scout shouted. "They're trying to circle back. Finn, go check it out," Silas ordered, his attention fatally divided. "Luke with me. We press forward." The plan had worked. As Finn disappeared back down the tunnel, Silas and Luke continued directly into Caleb's sights. Caleb was a statue. He let them take 2 more steps, centering his aim not on Silas, but on the man beside him. A dead foreman was a problem. A dead Silas would bring the law down on them for the wrong reasons. He had to isolate his true target. He squeezed the trigger. The gunshot was a physical, deafening roar that slammed against the rock walls. Below, Luke cried out and crumpled to the ground. Silas instantly dropped the lantern, which sputtered and died, and dove for cover, plunging the entire mine into absolute blackness. "Sniper!" Silas roared into the dark. "Finn, get back here!" Caleb was already moving, pulling Jade away from the fissure. "Come on," he hissed, "before they pinpoint us." They scrambled forward through the gallery, leaving the panicked shouts behind them. The passage began to slope downwards, and soon they emerged back into the main tunnel, well ahead of their pursuers. But their hope vanished in an instant. The way forward was completely sealed by a massive ancient cave-in, a dead end. "We're trapped." Jade breathed despair washing over her. "No, Caleb said, his eyes scanning the blockage. He pointed to a small, dark opening at the base of the rock fall, barely 2 feet high. A cold draft emanated from it. There, the way out. But as they lunged for it, they heard pounding footsteps approaching fast. They were out of time. "Get through!" Caleb commanded, shoving Jade toward the crawl space. "Go now! I'm not leaving you," she cried, turning back. "Don't let Elias's death be for nothing." He snapped his face a mask of desperation as the sounds grew louder. "Get the story out! Go!" He gave her one last, powerful shove. She stumbled, falling to her hands and knees and scrambling into the tight opening. The rock scraped her back and tore at her clothes. Behind her, she heard the final confrontation begin. "It's over, Cowboy." Silas sneered, his voice dangerously close. The remaining henchman, Finn, was with him. Nowhere left for a one-armed man to run. Jade kept crawling, tears of terror streaming down her face. She could see a faint grey light ahead, the exit. She had to keep going. It was the only way to validate Caleb's sacrifice. A gunshot roared deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. She screamed, convinced Caleb was dead. But then she heard his voice, strained but alive. "That's one less snake." She heard the sounds of a desperate struggle, grunts, the thud of a body hitting rock, the scrape of boots. It was Caleb against Silas, 1 against 1. Then Silas's voice, triumphant and cruel, cut through the noise. "Drop the gun, Cowboy, or I'll put a bullet right through this hole and kill the girl myself." He was bluffing, but Jade knew Caleb couldn't take that chance. She was frozen at the edge of the crawl space, halfway to freedom, but tethered by the fight behind her. The ledger. It was her only weapon. Taking a shuddering breath, she pushed herself back into the entrance of the opening, holding the ledger in her hand. "It's over, Silas," she shouted, her voice shaking but clear. "Let him go." The sounds of the fight stopped. "Jade," Silas said, his voice like silk hiding a viper. "My dear, bring me my property, and I will consider letting your protector live." "Liar," she shot back. "You'll kill us both." "Perhaps," he admitted coolly. "But what choice do you have? Give me the ledger." This was the final play. She looked at the book in her hand, the record of his sins, her father's final silent testimony. With a surge of pure defiant rage, she knew what she had to do. "You want it so badly, Silas," she screamed into the darkness. "Then have it!" With a cry, she ripped the ledger in half. Then she ripped the halves into quarters, the sound of tearing paper echoing like a gunshot in the confined space. A howl of inhuman fury erupted from the tunnel. "No!" Silas shrieked. It was the sound of a king watching his empire turn to dust in his hands. His rage made him reckless. In that single vital moment of distraction, Caleb lunged. Another gunshot exploded in the tunnel. It was followed by the sickening heavy thud of a body falling to the rock floor. Then silence. Jade held her breath, her body paralyzed. Was it over? A figure appeared at the dark entrance to the crawl space, crawling slowly towards the light. It was Caleb. His face was bruised and bleeding, his coat torn, but he was alive. He collapsed out of the tunnel and into the snow beside her, gasping for the cold, clean air. "It's done," he breathed. "It's over." Behind him in the dark of the mountain lay Silas Blackwood, a tyrant entombed in the cold earth he had fought so viciously to own. Jade looked from Caleb's exhausted face to the torn, scattered pieces of the ledger lying in the snow. Her proof was gone. "The ledger," she whispered, her victory. feeling strangely hollow. I destroyed it. Caleb followed her gaze. A slow, weary smile touched his lips. He reached out with his one good hand, his touch gentle on her arm. The ledger was never the proof, Jade, he said, his voice quiet but certain. It was just paper. He looked her in the eyes, his own gaze clear and steady for the first time. You are the proof. We are. We walked out of his mine. He didn't. In the end, it wasn't a ledger or a lawman that brought down Silas Blackwood. It was the unbreakable will of a woman who refused to be property, and the courage of a man who chose to face his own ghosts in the dark. The story of Jade Monroe and Caleb Hayes isn't just a tale of the Wild West. It's a testament to the fact that true justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's forged in fire, earned in blood, and found in the simple, powerful act of two people standing together against the dark refusing to break. They walked down from that mountain, not as victims but as survivors who had reclaimed their lives from a man who thought he was a king. If this story of resilience, courage, and the fight for freedom moved you, please give this video a like. It helps us share these powerful narratives with more people. Share this story with someone who loves a true, gripping drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories from the untamed pages of history. Thank you for listening.